Hello and welcome to my Sim Racing Corner, and this is my full review for the Thrustmaster T818 10Nm direct drive wheelbase. This is Thrustmaster's first direct drive system, announced over a year earlier before finally launching, and remains shrouded in mystery, Thrustmaster releasing only a handful of vague close-up pictures and limited details over that gap, so it's been a much anticipated product. The first thing to know is the T818 is PC only, there is no console support. Thrustmaster have not announced a console compatible version of this wheelbase at this time. And secondly, all Thrustmaster wheels are compatible with this wheelbase using this special adapter. One is included in the box with the T818, and further adapters can be purchased individually directly from the Thrustmaster store. And finally, before we move on, I have published a number of other videos on the T818, such as my unboxing video. Do check the video description for those links. The wheelbase weighs 5.4 kilograms. The overall footprint, excluding the quick release mount, is 185mm deep, 190mm wide, and 170mm tall. On the side panel, there's a cluster of buttons. On the left, these are described as action buttons, so they can be mapped to game functions. The round button featuring the logo is the multifunctional mode button. Its purpose is for flipping around the throttle and clutch inputs if you have an inverted pedal setup. And finally, the stop FFB button on the right. That one's more obvious. It's an emergency stop safety button that turns off the force feedback. Three of the side panels have this slatted design feature. It's not just for looks. Taking a closer inspection, these are vents for air circulation to allow warm air generated by the motor to escape. The rear panel, as you'd expect, is where the sockets are hidden away. Also, the power button is located here. Thrustmaster pedals can be plugged directly into the wheelbase. However, there is no input to accommodate a Thrustmaster shifter. Since this is a PC-only wheelbase, that's not really an issue. Thrustmaster shifters also support USB and therefore can be plugged directly into a spare PC USB port. There are two inputs labelled in the manual described as unused ports. There's no further information to suggest their exact function. The quick release system is proprietary and a unique design, with a latching system for securing the wheel to the base. The silver coloured articulating pieces are aluminium, the rest of the base side quick release is plastic. As is the adapter we need to use with our Thrustmaster wheel. The collar piece drives the adapter shaft into the wheel. It's a very tight fit and it's designed like this to ensure it joins the two pieces together firmly with no looseness. After all, this is what's connecting the wheel to the wheelbase, and it needs to be able to cope with the strong forces output from the motor. The wheelbase has 4 M6 threaded holes for hard mounting. If you need to drill new holes to secure the wheelbase, there's a template available on the support page. In addition, and sold as separate accessories from Thrustmaster directly, there's a cockpit mounting kit and a desk mounting kit. I have the desk mounting kits here. Due to the forces exerted, Thrustmaster advise a minimum tabletop thickness of 25mm. Also, the clamp opens up to a maximum of 40mm, so really under that measurement and between 25mm for the surface thickness is where you want to be with this. The table clamp is strong and up to the task, so I can recommend it. The wheelbase is perfectly secure on my table here. Taking another look at the plates, those drilled holes on both sides offers another potential mounting function. Let's take a look inside the T818. The construction is simple enough, screws and clipped on pieces. You probably already know, but I'll say this anyway. The enclosure is made up of mostly plastic parts. We'll circle back onto the build quality later in the video, but we're going to move things along a bit onto the track for the testing segment of the video. The first thing I'd like to cover is game compatibility, and coming up throughout the rest of the review will be clips I recorded from the 10 games I ran during my testing. Compatibility was flawless and without any setup complications. Broadly, I expect compatibility to be a strong feature of the T818. The driver installation software used by the T818 is exactly the same one that you download and install for all of their other wheelbases. And here's an interesting discovery. The previous wheelbase I was testing for review before this one was the Thrustmaster T818, their cheapest force feedback racing wheel. So that was the very last wheelbase I ran in the same series of games. And I found out that the T818 was already recognised by these games. I didn't need to rebind the wheel. Under the Windows Game Controllers panel, both the T128 and the T818 are listed as Thrustmaster Advanced Mode Racer, so games effectively recognise it as being the same piece of hardware. And I also recall the T248 is also shown as this under the Windows Game Controllers panel too. This is a masterstroke from Thrustmaster. All these three wheelbases, and these are their newest models as well, are all recognised by Windows as the same hardware device. This makes it very easy for game developers to support these Thrustmaster wheelbases, so in essence I think game compatibility is surely not going to be an issue for this wheelbase. When you drop into the wheelbase control panel, you're presented with a similar but not identical set of options shared by their other wheelbases. Notably, the mode setting is new. Here there are 4 listed options: Comfort, Sport, Performance and Extreme. This is an interesting feature that adjusts the intensity of the force feedback effects, but changing this has no bearing on the counterforce weight resistance of the wheel. That remains consistent. So if I were to use Comfort mode, this significantly reduces the vibrancy of all the track effect elements, such as the track surface texture, curbs, grass and gravel. It's all lightened and the track feels kind of smooth. There's still elements there, some of the stronger effects come through, but it is lowered quite a lot. Ramp it up to Extreme and this effectively overdrives those effects. Everything is stronger and more vigorous. The jolts from the force feedback can get pretty crazy using that extreme mode setting. So more is not necessarily better. Too much can make it more difficult to steer and then it becomes counterproductive. However, it does serve a useful purpose. No two racing games are exactly alike when it comes to force feedback. Some games do it better than others, some delivering a really nice constant flow of interesting and informative sensations, and others can be kind of bland in comparison. So using that mode setting, you can add a bit more oomph to the force feedback, or indeed for the reverse purpose to make it more comfortable by setting a lower mode, if that's better for you. To recap on something I briefly mentioned before, this is independent from the counterforce resistance heaviness you get from the wheel. So weaving the car and getting that sensation of weight transfer or rotating the car into corners, that remains unchanged no matter what mode setting you have. So consider it a separation of elements. The motor is rated at 10 Newton meters of constant torque. Be aware, often direct drive wheelbases are listed with a peak torque rating, and these are two different metrics. Constant torque is the sustained power output the motor is able to achieve. Peak torque is the motor's maximum torque it can only output for a short period of time. So the peak torque of the T818 will be higher than 10 Newton meters, but we don't know what that number is. And certainly the wheelbase motor here is plenty strong, and I promise you, you won't be running the force feedback in both the driver and the racing games at 100%. For sure, that is completely subjective and down to individual taste, of course, and also the games, in fact. But for reference, I didn't run the in-game force feedback much higher than 70%, and for some games much lower than that. So there's plenty of overhead and no chance of force feedback clipping. Also, in the driver software, I always run the force feedback at 100% and then I adjust it in game. So, that gives you a reference point of how I was setting my force feedback levels. In this clip, you can see I'm not using a Thrustmaster wheel, and this is possible by combining a 3D printed adapter. You can find those on Thingiverse and print them yourself, or buy one on eBay or AliExpress, and then using the Thrustmaster adapter alongside it. So you're not technically forced to use a Thrustmaster branded wheel with the T818. As well as strength from the large motor, a direct drive wheelbase should be able to output force feedback with a lot of detail, and you'll feel things through the wheel you've never felt before if you're upgrading from an entry-level belt or gear-driven wheelbase. Racing games feel more lively, and quite frankly, it's more fun and engaging. Also, you have a greater understanding of the track passing under the tyres and the grip through the force feedback, since it communicates so much information, and the T818 is doing a good job. And it's also worth saying at this point that the quality of force feedback from different games can vary greatly, and broadly speaking, casual racing games have simplified physics, and since the physics are the basis of the force feedback, expect force feedback from a casual racing game to feel quite different compared to a more sophisticated sim racing title. And sim racing games is where the T818 shows its best form. R-Factor 2 and its use of laser scanned tracks, for example, where every bump and undulation is accurately mapped. The T818 force feedback has the chops to pick up these elements. There's plenty of details coming through the force feedback here. And don't forget, it's not just about the small details. Whack a curb and you'll be punished with a heavy jolt from that strong motor. Turning the car into corners, the counterforce weight resistance of the wheel progressively builds up. You can use this to tickle the limit of tyre grip. If you step beyond the limit, the force feedback clearly broadcasts this. When traction is lost, the back end begins to slip and over-rotate. The force feedback signals this instantly as the weight of the wheel begins to feel loose and unresponsive. The T818 communicates these changes as they happen, so often there's still time to recover the car from the jaws of catastrophe with a rapid counter-steer correction and adjusting the pedal input. And I can feel the force feedback responding as the car rebalances and becomes stable. I'm able to lean on the T818 and trust the force feedback to communicate the balance of the car. And if I'm still learning the track in the car and testing different approaches into corners with the turn-in angle and speed, the response from the force feedback is dynamic and evolving. I can feel it when I've nailed it and use that to learn better racecraft and consistency. And likewise, when I haven't quite managed to master a corner, I can sense that too through the way the force feedback responds. During this race and the final 2 laps, I was able to tell I cooked those tyres and no longer had much grip. I could feel this through the force feedback. This demonstrated the accurate force feedback from the game and the T818's sensitivity in relaying this. Force feedback from some direct drive wheelbases can sometimes have a slightly sharp or notchy feel with some effects, like the track texture or small bumps. It can give the effects a sort of artificial feel. This can be addressed by adding some damping in the driver software, and that will take the edge off this, giving the details a more rounded and blended feel. Personally, I avoid damping as the result of using it is adding a layer of heaviness to the wheel, so I'm not running damping on the T818 here. And interestingly, there's no element of notchiness from the force feedback. I do wonder if the quick release assembly, being that it is plastic, is essentially creating a damping effect. I can't be sure, but it does sound plausible. I can tell you that the wheel is firmly connected to the wheelbase. There's no flex from the steering column or quick release in normal use, regardless of how high I run the force feedback strength. However, the rim itself does flex when put under stress, but there's nothing to be concerned about. A demonstration like this always appears worse than reality. Most standard wheel rims will have some flex when pushed and tugged in this unnatural manner. But the main thing is the quick release and all the components used in this assembly, including the adapter pieces, are robust. When you handle the parts, you can tell they're using different types of plastics and using specific ones with properties for strength and stiffness. I believe it's a nylon reinforced material. It's the same deal when we look inside the wheelbase. The motor housing is also a reinforced plastic. There's an L-shaped steel mounting bracket that holds the motor, and that steel bracket sweeps underneath the motor, providing the hard mounting points. And finally, the outer shell is mainly plastic too, with those two thin aluminium covers that improve the appearance. Overall, the build quality does seem to be sufficient for the job in hand. For my driving seat, using the T818, it comes across as a robust piece of hardware and really no different than any other direct drive wheelbase I've planted on the rig in how sturdy it feels. My review today is not the first piece of content I've published on the T818 on the channel, so I have had the opportunity to read comments from owners and non-owners up to now. Early adopters seem to be impressed by the T818 and enjoying this new wheelbase. On the flip side, there's many onlookers that are totally unimpressed and unconvinced because of how much plastic is present. For years we've seen and come to expect wheelbases that contain powerful direct drive motors to be mostly surrounded by metal, and here we have a new product that surrounds the motor mostly with plastic, and some people are having a hard time with this. And the question is it going to be less durable? Will it have a shorter lifespan over a solid metal wheelbase? Well, what really matters is the motor itself and not what surrounds it, as long as the enclosure is suitably made and robust, and it does appear to be okay here, regardless of it not being metal. But since this is a new product, as for reliability, we just don't know. We'll have to wait and see how the T818 holds up in the months and years to come. If I just rate the T18 on its performance during my testing, well, the force feedback was informative and consistent. It gets a clean pass there, and I had no problems setting it up, or did I encounter any compatibility issues. These are all positive factors, and ultimately I had a good time using this wheelbase, and I can only call it as I see it. For anybody who already owns a mid-range Thrustmaster belt wheelbase with 2 or 3 rims, this offers a practical upgrade path. You can reuse your existing wheels and sell the old wheelbase, making the upgrade cost pretty reasonable. If I was in that position, I'd imagine that's what I'd do. So would I recommend the T818 if I was not already a Thrustmaster wheelbase owner under the circumstances I've just outlined? Knowing what I know and my experience owning and having reviewed a number of other direct drive wheelbases, I have to admit the T818 is not my first choice. This is a good direct drive wheelbase, I've enjoyed using it. However, I have used other good direct drive wheelbases too, and ones which I would say are better options out there. For £600, that gets you just the T818 wheelbase. So if we add the table clamp and a Thrustmaster wheel, you're in for about £815 to £830. If you're willing to spend a bit more, then the Logitech G Pro force feedback definitely outperforms the T818. In fact, the sensitivity of the G Pro's force feedback is superior to a lot of competitors out there, including ones that cost more than the G Pro. It sets a very high bar. Alternatively, for less money than the T818, I can highly recommend the Moza R9. This wheelbase is decently powerful and compact, featuring an automotive D1 spec compatible quick release and aluminium enclosure. Sitting next to the T818, the Moza R9 oozes quality and looks like it should be the more expensive product out of the two. And frankly, it's clear that Moza puts more passion into their products than Thrustmaster does by a long way. And for me, the Moza R9 offers the best deal in sim racing right now. I have full detailed reviews for both the Logitech G Pro and the Moza R9 on the channel. Links are in the description, so check those out. In conclusion, the T818 did a fine job throughout my testing. Anybody using this wheelbase will have a great time with it, I have no doubts. I had no issues with its performance and I'm quite happy to continue using it. But at the same time, I can't recommend it when there are better competitive products that offer more value for money. That's my opinion, guys. The T818 is priced between two better alternative wheelbases. And that's the problem for the Thrustmaster T818, and that's the problem I have with the Thrustmaster T818. If they drop the price by £100 to £500, realistically, I think that's what it's worth, and then I'd be more inclined to give it a thumbs up recommendation. And there you have it, that's my full review for the Thrustmaster T818. Thank you very much for watching. Do drop comments below the video and share your thoughts. And don't forget, I'll be back soon with something new. So until next time, happy simming and bye-bye.